The story of Trinidad and Tobago is one that many of us are familiar with from childhood. Christopher Columbus, sailing across the Caribbean in 1498, spots land and names it Trinidad because he believes he has found the land of the three breasts, or Trinidad. From there, the islands remain relatively unknown until 1783, when the British began settling the islands, eventually gaining full control by 1834 and merging it with its sister island Tobago in 1888 to form the colony of Trinidad and Tobago. And so we were taught about our history. But what if I told you that these islands had been discovered long before Christopher Columbus ever set foot here? That there was already a thriving civilization on the island, and that those people have been here for hundreds of years prior to any European contact? It's time to share the untold indigenous perspective on how Christopher Columbus really found Trinidad. Christopher Columbus was an Italian explorer who sailed under the flag of Spain. He is credited with being the first European to reach the Americas since the Vikings, although recent evidence suggests that there were other explorers who may have made it before him. In 1492, he landed in the Bahamas and claimed the islands for Spain. In the following years, he explored much of the Caribbean and South America, searching for a direct route to Asia. Columbus believed that the Earth was smaller than what most Europeans thought at the time, and he wanted to prove it by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. After receiving funding from the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, Columbus set sail from Spain in 1492 with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina. He and his crew sailed across the Atlantic, encountering many storms and hardships along the way, but they never lost hope. On October 12, 1492, after more than 2 months at sea, they finally spotted land. This would be the first time in history that anyone had reached the Americas by boat. Excited and weary, Columbus and his men explored the coast, claiming the islands for Spain. They named the largest island San Salvador, now known as one of the Bahamas. Over the next few years, Columbus would return to the Americas several times, exploring the Caribbean and South America, believing that he had found a direct route to Asia. However, he never did find what he was looking for and died believing that he had actually reached India. It wasn't until much later that it was realized that he had actually discovered a new continent. As Columbus sailed around the islands, he encountered many different cultures of indigenous peoples. These peoples had developed their own unique ways of life, languages, and customs. Columbus and his crew interacted with some of these cultures, trading and exchanging goods. It was during one of these encounters that Columbus claimed to have discovered Trinidad. According to Columbus's logbook on July 31st, 1498, while sailing off the coast of Venezuela, he spotted a large island which he named Trinidad. His belief that he had found the island of Mogadiscio, also known as the Island of the Three Breasts, led him to name the island accordingly. This claim is disputed, however, with evidence suggesting that Columbus may not have actually seen Trinidad at all. Some historians believe that Columbus may have actually seen the mainland of Venezuela, or that he was misinformed by the indigenous peoples he met. Others believe that Trinidad was actually discovered by Portuguese explorers before Columbus ever arrived. Regardless of who discovered Trinidad first, it is clear that the island has been inhabited by humans for thousands of years before Columbus arrived. The first inhabitants of Trinidad are believed to have been the Arawak and Carib-speaking peoples who arrived in the region around 500 BC. These early inhabitants developed their own unique cultures, languages, and ways of life. The Arawaks were known for their skilled craftsmanship and beautiful pottery, while the Caribs were expert hunters and fishermen. These early inhabitants lived in harmony with the natural world, using the resources of the island to sustain themselves and their communities. When Christopher Columbus arrived in 1498, he encountered a number of different indigenous tribes, each with their own distinct culture and way of life. The Arawaks were the dominant group, living mainly in small villages and relying on agriculture and fishing to sustain themselves. The Caribs, on the other hand, were more nomadic, moving from place to place and living off the land. Columbus and his crew interacted with the indigenous peoples, but these interactions were often fraught with tension. The Europeans brought with them diseases that devastated the native populations who had no immunity to them. Additionally, the Europeans wanted the indigenous peoples to convert to Christianity and adopt their customs and way of life. Many of the indigenous peoples resisted these efforts, but others were forced to conform. Despite the challenges they faced, the indigenous peoples of Trinidad persevered. They continued to practice their religions and traditions and played a vital role in the development of the island. Their knowledge of the land and its resources was invaluable, and they helped the Europeans to understand and navigate the complex ecosystem of the island. In the years that followed Columbus's arrival, Trinidad would become a part of the Spanish Empire. The Spanish brought with them a new set of challenges for the indigenous peoples, including forced labor and the introduction of slavery. However, the indigenous peoples continued to adapt and survive. They worked to maintain their cultures and traditions and pass down their knowledge to future generations. It was until the 19th century that the indigenous peoples of Trinidad were finally free from forced labor and slavery. By this point, however, their numbers had been greatly reduced due to disease and exploitation. Despite this, they continued to play a vital role in the development of the island. The indigenous peoples of Trinidad have a rich and complex history that predates Christopher Columbus's arrival by thousands of years. They were skilled farmers, hunters, and fishermen who lived in harmony with the natural world. When Columbus arrived, he encountered a number of different tribes, each with their own unique culture and way of life. Although the Europeans brought with them new challenges for the indigenous peoples, they persevered and continued to play a vital role in the development of the island. It wasn't until the 19th century that they were finally free from forced labor and slavery, but their numbers had been greatly reduced by then. I know many of us grew up hearing stories of old about Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the Americas. But what if there was more to the story? What if the real story was the story of the indigenous people who had been living on the islands for thousands of years before Columbus ever arrived? Christopher Columbus is a controversial figure in history, and his legacy is a complicated one. While he is credited with opening up the Americas to European exploration and colonization, he also initiated a period of violence and exploitation for the indigenous peoples. It is important to remember that Columbus was not the first person to inhabit the Americas, and that there were already thriving civilizations here long before he arrived. In Trinidad, specifically, there is evidence of human habitation dating back thousands of years. The island was home to various indigenous tribes, each with their unique cultures and traditions. When Columbus arrived, he encountered these tribes and claimed the island for Spain. He and his crew interacted with the indigenous peoples, but these encounters were often fraught with tension. The Europeans brought with them diseases that devastated the native populations who had no immunity to them. Additionally, the Europeans wanted the indigenous peoples to convert to Christianity and adopt their customs and way of life. Many of the indigenous peoples resisted these efforts, but others were forced to conform. Despite the challenges they faced, the indigenous peoples of Trinidad persevered. They continued to practice their religions and traditions and played a vital role in the development of the island. Their knowledge of the land and its resources was invaluable, and they helped the Europeans to understand and navigate the complex ecosystem of the island. It is important to recognize the contributions of the indigenous peoples of Trinidad and to acknowledge the challenges they faced during this time period. Their resilience and adaptability in the face of these challenges is truly remarkable. So, what can we learn from the story of Trinidad and Tobago's discovery? First and foremost, we can learn the importance of recognizing the contributions of indigenous peoples. The indigenous peoples of Trinidad and Tobago have a rich and complex history that dates back thousands of years. They were the first inhabitants of the islands, and their presence here predates Christopher Columbus' arrival by a significant margin. We must acknowledge their contributions to the development of the islands and recognize the challenges they faced during this time period. We can also learn the importance of understanding the complexities of history. The story of Trinidad and Tobago's discovery is often oversimplified, and we are taught a narrative that centers around Christopher Columbus. However, there is much more to the story, and it is important to understand the complexities of this event. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1498 marked a turning point in history, not only for the indigenous peoples of Trinidad and Tobago, but for the entire world. His arrival initiated a period of exploration and colonization of the Americas that would have a profound impact on the world for centuries to come. Finally, we can learn the importance of empathy and understanding. The indigenous peoples of Trinidad and Tobago experienced immense challenges during this time period, including the introduction of new diseases, forced labor, and the loss of their traditional way of life. It is important to empathize with their experiences and to try to understand the challenges they faced. In conclusion, the story of Trinidad and Tobago's discovery is a complex and multifaceted one. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1498 marked a significant moment in history, but it is important to remember that he was not the first person to inhabit the islands. The indigenous peoples of Trinidad and Tobago have a rich and complex history that dates back thousands of years, and their contributions to the development of the islands must be acknowledged. We must also strive to understand the complexities of history and to empathize with the experiences of those who came before us. Only then can we truly appreciate the richness and complexity of our shared history.